Hi, students. I want to discuss cosmology in this short video and frame that as a basis for the extrapolation that we'll take into understanding states of mind in the yoga tradition, how we work with them, and what is possible with them. We kind of understand why such things are possible when we study the nature of the universe as understood by the yogic traditions. So I shared with you this idea of the asymptote, this idea that reality moves from emptiness, from nothingness, this concept of nothingness, into somethingness. And that is an infinite regress, what we call an infinite regress, which is to say the units of matter as they materialize into reality out of nothingness are infinitely small, and they become larger and larger and larger as those smallnesses, those small elements of materiality congregate or interact and start to build larger manifestations. So one thing that is helpful to think about in terms of our modern scientific view is that our capacity to find smaller and smaller units of matter, quarks, Higgs bosons, etc., which began with the atom, moved to protons, neutrons, in the midst, as the scientists keep telling us, within a vaster experience of empty space, which is consistent with yogic explanations, is to see that we are limited by our capacity to find smaller and smaller particles only by our capacity to investigate and see. And we see this in the larger scientific community as we build fantastic atom colliders like the one in Switzerland, that it takes more and more energy and ferocity to find these smaller and smaller elements of matter. But what the yoga tradition suggests to us is that this process will never end. We are only limited by our capacity to see. The asymptote is a reality in terms of the manifestation of reality, and we see this in the video that I shared with you about the random fluctuations of quarks within empty space, how they appear and disappear. This is consistent with the yogic view. Things appear, things disappear. Things will appear and persist and then build the building blocks of reality, which in another lecture we'll talk about the tattvas as an explanation of the more subtle building blocks of reality, which is much, much more subtle than the grossness of the atomic table, the periodic table of elements, though it's a very similar conception of the structure of reality. So in this talk, I don't only want to talk about the ontological view, that view of the very nature of the cosmos of the universe, but I also want to talk about our conceptual process in relationship to that. We see the world in terms of duality. As the universe moves towards grossness, it naturally moves towards greater and greater dualism. The only way in which we can encounter the materiality of reality, the limitedness of reality, is to recognize its dualistic nature. That is, we can't recognize up without down. We can't represent black. We can't see black without white. We can't see moving without stillness. So this dualistic quality that the mind naturally functions to create so that we can negotiate this world of real things, this world of cultivating real manifestations, our lives at the very least, but just to fix the engine of a car or to write a scholarly paper, you have to work with this and that, with up and down, with the whole language, any language in human experience, the whole language of dualisms, which builds different conceptual structures. And this is part of the very nature of reality, and is also a key to the non-dualistic experience we have in meditation. In meditation, we move out of mind. Mind's business is to create dualism. That's the way it survives, the way it functions as a survivalist organ. Yeah? The mind is meant to divide, to pull things into their respective pieces so that we can manipulate them, basically, so that our biological organism can survive, so that we can build this manifest reality, which is part of the leading edge of time's evolution. We participate in time's evolution by building things, even if they are just ideas. These ideas help to advance human and universal evolution. These are basic ideas from the tradition. But epistemologically, not ontologically. Ontology describes the structure of the universe. Epistemology describes how we know reality. Epistemologically and ontologically, the world is dual. But I want to focus here a bit in this last 5 minutes of the video on the epistemological aspect of duality. It's this capacity to see the world in dualistic terms, which allows us to negotiate, allows us to create concepts, allows us to pin something down to say exactly where it is in space in terms of relative terms, but not, of course, in absolute terms, because everything is everywhere from the macrocosmic and the microcosmic point of view. This capacity is transcended in the yogic experience because we move into a pure state of consciousness. It's like we're retreating from the grossness of dualism into this nether state, this state closer to atomic physics, closer to that place of the pure emptiness of space, the pure vacuum of space. And from that attitude, we can see the dualism clearly. We come closer and closer to this ideal of seeing the actual real, which we see threaded out through all the spiritual texts that we're discussing. The real is, of course, obstructed by our dualistic filters. And in the meditative process, the mind's activity, which is a kind of screen, which looks out on the world of reality and puts it into dualistic terms for our use, it falls away as our primary locus of seeing, our primary locus of orientation in the world. We step behind mind into the state of the self-reflective state of consciousness. And from that state, we gain the capacity. This also relates to our further discussion of cities and miraculous powers. We gain the capacity not only to see dramatically deeply, to see at a level which is transcendent, but also to see the very nature of reality itself and gain the capacity to manipulate it. When you look at the videos of John Chang, when you look at the videos of the Fire Yoga, and you see them doing these things which are presumably outside of human normal capacities, the things that we ascribe in the biblical world, in the Western world, to Jesus, they confuse us because we're oriented in a dualistic mindset. But if we are oriented in a universal consciousness mindset, we would see that what these individuals are doing is they've learned to retreat from merely rational consciousness, this way of structuring reality in terms in which things seem possible or impossible, and have moved into a state beyond the rational physical world and can manipulate it from that place. If we see the nature of the rational world, of the dualistic world, from a deeper place, we see how it's structured. And we're in a place of much greater energy manifestation. We can manipulate energies at a much, much greater level at the subtle place rather than at the gross place. And from that place, things can be done which seem, from our gross dualistic state of consciousness, to be impossible. Science, of course, is this world of creating rational structures. And of course, it has a hard time with such miraculous manifestations as well, because they seem beyond rationality. And science, the work of science and the math which underlies it, is to describe the world in dualistic terms. Subtler and subtler and subtler dualistic terms. The quark is so much more subtler than the atom, and the atom is so much more subtle than the element that it represents, like a hunk of gold. Yeah, that's very, very gross. We move to the subtle part. We get into the microcosmic world. And it's even deeper beyond that we get into the world of feeling and emotion, and into the world beyond that of the possibility of the witness consciousness. Yeah. So I'm out of time here. My video is going to block out if I don't stop within a couple seconds. Thank you for listening. We'll explain this concept further in later lectures. Be well.